All right, let me preface this by saying from the get-go that I do not and never have particularly cared much for football. There was a brief sort of phase in my early childhood, between the ages of 8 to 10, where I was kind of forced and pressured to pretend to like football just so other people would talk to me at school, just so I could pretend to have friends. I kind of did it just because I had to fit in, but I never really cared for football. All the names of the football players have just whizzed over my head. Like, it has been such a long time since I last, read up on what was happening in football. I remembered Wayne Rooney, Cristiano Ronaldo, and Ruud van Nistelrooy and Thierry Henry were those are the only names that I still remembered, and and I've really been behind ever since then. And that was way back in, gosh, that must have been 20 years ago now. Anyway, actually, it's not just football. The same is generally true with all spectator sports. I've never really had much interest in it. I suppose growing up, because I've always been so hyperactive, I've always been the type of person rather to take part in a sport than to actually sit and watch it. And there's a very social aspect, I think, about liking football. And because for the most part of my life, I've never been that much of a social person. I've just never liked things that are popular, things that everyone talks about. And I've always had to force myself to like them, mainly due to that very reason. So whether it be football or even the Olympics, I've just always been tuned out of those. The only exception, though, to this is when the England team appears to be doing very well during the World Cup. And lately, I'd say we've been having quite a fairly good run. I mean, we've never won the World Cup since 1966, I think it was. But I think we've been doing better and better. We've been getting closer and closer. I remember back in 2018, we made it all the way up to the quarterfinals, and then we got beaten by Croatia. And here's an amusing little anecdote I want to share with you. I remember at the time I was working as a customer sales assistant for McDonald's in Chertsey Road. This was the week after we got knocked out of the tournament by Croatia, and my then manager, he asked me, "Hey Ben, do you like football?" And I turned to him and I said, "I did until last Thursday." Anyway, I thought I'd share that. But this year round, we did even better than that, didn't we? We not only beat Croatia really early on in the tournament, but we made it all the way up to the semi-finals. We beat the legendary Norwegians and their star player, what was his name? Erin Harland. Gosh, I've seen that guy's name and face everywhere. How is it that I can't remember it properly? So Ervin Harland, something like that. That was a great game. I remember my brother, my cousin, and I. We all went round the local pub and we all sat and watched it live. And we did the same for the semi-final games we had against the Argentinians, which we lost. I thought I'd give my thoughts, first of all, on the game, on the Argentinians, and on what I believe football and spectator sport has sort of become, the void it's beginning to fill, and its purpose. Now we live in sort of a post-national civilization. So first of all, I never really, I would have been surprised, I think, if we had made it all the way to the top and we'd won the World Cup. It's kind of a cliche with us British. We invented most of the world's major sports and sporting events, but we can never seem to win in any of them. But we did pretty damn well this time round. I'd say my star player has to be Jordan Pickford, because he's always, each time we're on the cusp of losing, he's always there doing all the hard work, catching all the balls and stuff like that. And I'm not going to throw shade on any of our, Harry Kane or what was that other guy, Jude Bellingham. Yeah, those guys are pretty good as well. But we got beaten this time by the Argentinians. Now, let's talk about that game with the Argentinians. Something was off about this game, wasn't it? I noticed there's a huge there's so many differences between this game and the England v Norway game. For one, there were a lot more fouls. There were lots more instances of people kicking or tripping other people over. And it was really confusing and jarring. Many times I had to stop and whisper to my brother and my cousin, because we both went and saw it live at the local pub. Are we cheating against them, or are they cheating against us? Nobody seemed to know. We seemed to be doing very well in the first half of the game, but then at some point in the second half, we got complacent and we started playing all defensive, and the Argentinians, they just took possession of the ball and then they kept scoring, and that was a very disappointing moment for all of us. The Argentinians, to be fair, their reputation precedes them as a football team. They take football very seriously. I mean, for us, I love the England team, but really, it's just a game. It's not a matter of life and death for us. But to the Argentinians, it's more than a game. Football is basically their it's what they live for. I remember coming across this clip somewhere on X of this Argentinian streamer, and I think he was giving his thoughts on the England v Argentina game, and he was in tears, and he said, no, football is not just a game. It's so much more than that to us. We Argentinians, we're so poor. You don't understand what a triumph this is for us. Football's everything for us. Without it, we have nothing. I'm paraphrasing. If I'm ever able to come across that clip, maybe I'll link it or show it. But anyway, the Argentinians, to be fair, they did pretty well. I mean, Lionel Messi, he doesn't have the reputation that he has for being one of the greatest star players for nothing. I'll give credit where it's due. However, I want to talk about the conduct of the Argentinians, not just the conduct of the players, but of the Argentinians in general. Because as I said earlier, to us, it's just a game, so we can psychologically distance ourselves from it, and, we can behave in a sporting and good-natured manner. But I didn't really get the overall impression from the Argentinians that they felt the same way to us. I mean, for one, during the opening ceremony, in the opening stage of the game, where both teams sang their respective national anthems, we tried to sing our national anthem, but we were drowned out by the Argentinian supporters in the crowd shouting stuff like, "Whoever doesn't jump is English." Now, I understand the Argentinians aren't too happy with us because of the issue with the Falklands, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But none of us in the pub, we didn't shout or jeer or boo at the Argentinians when they were singing their national anthem. That's not the kind of stuff we do. I mean, for most of us, I guarantee this, some of us are old enough to have remembered the War of the Falklands, but a lot of us, we're just a bunch of youngsters and we want to enjoy the game. So I don't really understand why you would want to do that. That's just disrespectful. Oh, and the second thing I wanted to mention is there was that little stunt that happened later on. I think this was after the game had ended, where these Argentinian supporters ran onto the pitch carrying this big sign that said, "Las Malvinas, the Malvinas are Argentinian." I'm referencing, of course, the Falkland Islands. Yeah, that's right, because in Argentina, they're called the Malvinas, but to the rest of the world and to us, they're called the Falkland Islands. There are islands because years ago, we colonized them and claimed them in the name of the British Empire, but ever since then, they've kept on saying, no, these islands belong to us. And they've never let it go. There was a brief moment in the 1980s where they went to war against us and tried to take the islands, but then we declared war on them in return. We swiftly won the islands back, and then there was a referendum for all the Falklanders who lived there on whether they'd like to be considered British or Argentinian, and the results were pretty much unanimous. But there's so much more to this. I think I'm only just beginning to understand the psychology of Argentina and what the average Argentinian thinks. Because to me, I would be happy to classify the Falklands War as little more than a territorial dispute. You know, I'm not that viscerally angry over the fate of some small islands in a remote region tens of thousands of miles away. I'm happy to let bygones be bygones in the context of a football match, because as I've said before, it's just a game. You know, I think I remember there was this guy who described, ages ago, I can't remember who it was, who described the Falklands War as a battle between two bald men over a comb. But the Argentinians are still, they are really mad about this. Like, they have a huge grudge against us, and they're never missing an opportunity to reassert their claim over the islands. And I remember months earlier, long before this football match started, I remember seeing news on Twitter where I think it was a key figure in the Argentinian government, this woman whose name I forget right now. She talked about how she was hoping to reclaim the Argentinian islands, and basically they wanted to expel the Falklanders who are living there on the basis that they identified as British. And they were saying things like, well, if they believe Britain is their home, then they can go back home. And that is just, how am I meant to feel upon hearing that? That is their home. That's the only landmass they've ever known. You're talking about illegally expelling an entire group of people and then colonizing and settling it with your own. And this is not, by the way, this isn't even a fringe opinion in Argentina, because I noticed that the current president of Argentina, Javier Milei, initially, I think he was quite silent on the issue of the Malvinas. He didn't really speak too much about whether the Falklands belong to Argentina or to Britain. But then I noticed that his own supporters were criticizing him, and people in his cabinet who spoke vocally about trying to recapture the islands, they were rising in opinion polls over there. And I feel like at some point, the way politics are moving, Javier Milei is probably going to have to make some kind of, he's probably going to have to make some kind of statement where he tries to reassert Argentina's claim to the islands just to stay ahead in the polls. Because that is the psychology of this country. It's crazy to think that at some point, maybe, I don't know if this will happen in the near future or in the near distant future, but we may well be at war with them again. And so that's really not something that I want too much. The idea of going to war against another country, where, especially in the context where there's so much, there are way bigger things to worry about. Britain's being completely overrun by mass immigration. We're losing our identity and our culture to third world barbarians who are trashing everything that makes this country great and unique. We're losing our families and our children to all kinds of LGBT, woke leftist ideology. The last thing I want to do is go to war against a comparatively more conservative third world country that hasn't done anything personally wrong to me. But I can't abide, at the same time, I can't abide by the fact that A, they are openly disrespectful towards us in the context of an international sport where honestly, I've never intended any ill will towards them in the first place. B, they're threatening to ethnically cleanse our own territories. I'm certainly not happy that they're thinking of doing that. People talk about Argentina as though they are, they're a European nation, but they're not really, are they? They're a third world country for a reason, and this is how third world countries behave. Anyway, I'm not in a huge hurry to go to war against this foreign country, all for the sake of some tiny islands. But at the same time, I'm not just going to sit there and let my country, and let my own culture be disrespected like this, even if it's for a football game. So if you are one of those Argentinians, and you think it's okay to talk about ethnically cleansing the Falkland Islanders or reclaiming them or any of this, or shouting or jeering at us and our national anthem, well, fuck you. That's what I gotta say. You come for our islands? Well, you're about to see why we conquered the whole world again. Now, another thing I wanted to talk about is, I think it's really interesting, the ersatz role that football hooliganism and, football patriotism now plays in modern society. We live in a current age where it's considered socially unacceptable to be a patriot, to love your country and to celebrate your own nation and culture. You're likely to, for God's sake, there are people who are being fined or being arrested simply for putting up the England flag in public. There are councils that have literally told us to take down England flags because they are considered unsafe, for one silly reason to the next. We don't even enjoy any real representation at the government level. No representation for the English in our parliament. Everyone gets representation except us. We have a Scottish national parliament, a Welsh national parliament, but not an English parliament. We're constantly being written out of the casting of our own historical epic dramas. There's always this silly new BBC drama with some black woman in Regency period England, or an English king who's played by a black guy, or whatever nonsense this is. And if you so much as draw attention to this, you're likely to be called far right, you're likely to be called a racist, and so on, and you could even be chucked in prison for that. So it seems like the only time you can have unabashed pride in your nation and culture is in football. And to me, this doesn't really make me proud in any meaningful way. Really, I feel like it's sort of vulgarized, it's cheapened the value of our flag and of nationalism. I say this for a number of reasons. First of all, as I've said, I never really cared for football. I just don't like it. It's a vulgar sport. Most international sports I just find kind of dull and not really worth my time. And secondly, I've noticed, whenever I've been going around on Twitter, I've noticed all the people with football flags, all the people who appear to be football enthusiasts in their Twitter bio, they turn out to be rabid anti-white leftist cunts. Like, these are the people who cheer whenever racists are exposed. There was this absolute waste of oxygen, I remember, who tried to get this guy banned when he was watching a football match in America, and he was absolutely devastated when he found out that that person wouldn't be removed from the stadium, because unlike in the UK, they have free speech over in the United States. They have a First Amendment, and he seemed really gutted that he couldn't just shame this man out of existence. And he was genuinely perplexed as to why so many people were calling him a prick in his super chat and live comment sections. And that just seems, that's the kind of people that seem to be crazy about football now. And I feel like the right wing, the patriotic pro-nationalist cause, it's been irrevocably damaged and tarnished by its association, and not to mention cheapened by its association with football and international sport. Sportsball, as they now call it. So yeah, anyway, all in all, bad luck, lads. You know, it would have been nice if it had come home again. Maybe one day it will. Perhaps in my lifetime, we might win the World Cup a second time. But it is just a game. There's no need to go out, beat your wives. Oh yeah, I remember that. It's funny because people have been saying that there's been a rise in domestic violence each time we lose in England, each time we lose a football match or something like that. But anyway, there's no need to go out beating your wife or girlfriend just because we lost. Because you win some, you lose some. And we were beaten on the fact that our team just weren't that good. But that doesn't mean we can't try again and one day take it home again. But in the meantime, there are so much bigger things that we Brits need to be concerned about. You know, we're losing our country. We're losing it in the context of an international globalist culture war where our children are being raped and stabbed to death and stolen from us. It's insidious LGBT ideology that's being promulgated in our schools. Anyone who takes notice of this is being shamed out of existence in our towns and cities. People are losing freedom of speech. So forgive me for saying that I don't really give 1/3 of a shit about whether we win or lose a football tournament. I'm just saying. Anyway, that's about all. That's about all I have to say about that.